On a warm August night in 2015, the quiet town of Davidson County, North Carolina, was shattered by a chilling 911 call. On the other end of the line was Molly Martens, her voice frantic and breathless. She claimed her husband, Jason Corbett, was trying to strangle her, and that she and her father had fought to save her life. When police rushed to the scene, they found Jason lying lifeless in the master bedroom. His skull had been brutally crushed, the blood-soaked floor telling a story of extreme violence. Nearby lay two household items that were never meant to be weapons: a metal baseball bat and a heavy paving stone. Molly insisted it was self-defense. Her father, Thomas Martens, a 67-year-old retired FBI agent, backed her up. But from the very beginning, something about the scene didn't sit right with investigators. Jason had suffered at least 10 blows to the head, the kind of force that suggested not just defense but rage. And soon, whispers began to spread. Who really was Jason Corbett? What kind of marriage did he have with Molly Martens? And was this truly an act of survival or a carefully staged killing? This was not just a story of a husband and wife. It was a story that crossed oceans, tore apart families, and left two young children without their father. Before we continue, welcome to Crime Uncovered, where every case has a story, and the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button to stay updated on the latest true crime cases we uncover. And to our returning subscribers, thank you for your continued support. Don't forget to like this video so it reaches more people who care about the truth behind the headlines. I would love to know where you are watching from. Please drop your country in the comments below. Let's know how these stories travel. So back to the case. Jason Corbett was born in Ireland in 1976, in the quiet town of Limerick. Friends and family describe him as warm, hardworking, and deeply devoted to those he loved. He wasn't the kind of man to seek the spotlight. His world revolved around his family. Jason married his first wife, Margaret, often called Mags, and together they had two beautiful children, Jack and Sarah. By all accounts, Jason adored his family. He built a career, provided for them, and created a home filled with laughter and stability. But tragedy struck early. In 2006, Jason's life was shattered when Mags died suddenly from an asthma attack. Overnight, he became a single father, left to raise his children alone. The loss was devastating, but Jason's commitment to Jack and Sarah only deepened. For years, he balanced the challenges of work and fatherhood, determined to give his children the love and care they deserved. Friends often said Jason's entire purpose in life was to protect and nurture them. But behind the quiet routines of family life, he was still a man carrying the heavy weight of grief. It was in those years, after the death of his wife, that fate introduced him to someone new. A woman who would not only enter his home, but also change the course of his life forever. After the devastating loss of his wife, Jason was doing his best to raise Jack and Sarah while keeping up with the demands of everyday life. But as a single father, he needed help. That's when Molly Martens entered the picture. Molly was an American au pair, a young woman who came to Ireland to work as a nanny. She seemed like the perfect fit, someone who could help care for Jason's children, while also bringing some warmth back into the family's daily routine. At first, everything seemed normal. Molly appeared caring, attentive, and eager to help. She bonded with the children, helping with schoolwork, daily chores, and simply being there when Jason needed an extra hand. Over time, that professional relationship turned into something more personal. Jason and Molly began a romantic relationship. For Jason, who had lost so much, Molly seemed like a second chance at happiness. And soon marriage followed. Jason decided to move his family from Ireland to North Carolina, Molly's home, to start a new life together. On the surface, it seemed like the promise of a fresh start. But behind closed doors, the cracks in their marriage quickly began to show. Jason's friends and relatives noticed the tension, and Jason himself began to express concerns about Molly's behavior. He worried about her struggles with controlling the children and her emotional instability. Despite these doubts, Jason pressed on, determined to keep his family together. But as time passed, the relationship grew more volatile. The home that was supposed to be a place of healing slowly became a battleground. And what no one could predict was just how far the conflict inside that house would go, or how it would one day end in brutal violence. Life in North Carolina was nothing like the fresh start Jason had imagined. The marriage between Jason and Molly quickly grew strained. Molly struggled with the responsibilities of being a stepmother, and Jason began to feel that her behavior was unstable and manipulative. Friends and family noticed changes too. Jason confided in his relatives back in Ireland, telling them that things weren't right. He described Molly as controlling and emotionally unpredictable. Arguments became frequent, and the children sometimes found themselves caught in the middle of these conflicts. Jason began making plans to return home to Ireland with Jack and Sarah. He wanted a safer, more stable environment for them. But there was one major obstacle: Molly. Divorce was one thing, but Jason feared Molly would try to fight for custody of his children. He was determined to protect them, even if it meant a long and bitter legal battle. This looming custody fight only made the home environment more toxic. Molly, who had once been seen as a fresh start, now seemed to Jason like a threat to the very family he was trying to preserve. And as the tension mounted, a storm was quietly brewing inside the Martens household. One that would soon erupt in a violent, irreversible way. It was the early hours of August 2, 2015, in the quiet neighborhood of Panther Creek in Davidson County, North Carolina. What should have been a peaceful night instead turned into chaos and bloodshed. Jason Corbett was found brutally beaten to death in the bedroom of his own home. The weapon: a concrete paving brick and an aluminum baseball bat. His skull was crushed so badly that even seasoned investigators described the scene as one of the most violent they had ever encountered. Standing over his body were two people: his wife, Molly Martens, and her father, Thomas "Tom" Martens, a 67-year-old retired FBI agent. Both admitted to killing Jason, but they insisted it wasn't murder. According to them, it was self-defense. Their story was chilling. Tom claimed that in the middle of the night, he heard a struggle in the bedroom. He rushed in to find Jason allegedly choking Molly. Tom said he panicked, grabbed the nearest object, a baseball bat, and began hitting Jason to save his daughter's life. Molly backed up her father's account, claiming Jason had turned violent and she had feared for her life. But detectives weren't convinced. Jason was unarmed. He was beaten over and over, far beyond what could reasonably be described as an act of defense. The blood spatter, the number of blows, and the sheer force used painted a very different picture. One of rage, not desperation. The truth of what really happened in that bedroom was about to become the center of one of the most sensational murder trials in both North Carolina and Ireland. When police arrived at the Corbett home, what they saw didn't match the story Molly and Tom had told. Jason's body lay on the bedroom floor, surrounded by blood. The brutal force of the blows shocked even veteran officers. Investigators quickly noted that Jason had suffered at least 12 severe head wounds, more than what would have been necessary to stop someone in an act of self-defense. The room showed signs of a violent attack, but not of Jason assaulting Molly. In fact, Molly had no serious injuries, only minor marks, nothing to suggest a life-or-death struggle. Even stranger, the 911 call Tom made that night raised suspicion. In his calm, composed voice, he reported, "My daughter's husband. He's hitting her. He's choking her. I intervened. I think he's hurt badly. He's bleeding all over." But what stuck out to detectives was what Tom didn't say. He never asked for urgent medical help for Jason. He never pleaded for them to save his life. Instead, it sounded more like a man explaining away a killing he knew couldn't be undone. As evidence was collected, Jason's past began to resurface. Back in Ireland, his family was heartbroken and furious. They never believed Jason was abusive. They said Jason had confided in them before his death. He wanted to leave Molly, and he worried about who would take care of his children if anything happened to him. Jason's family claimed Molly wanted control, not just over him, but over his kids and his money. Investigators started to see a pattern. This wasn't a spontaneous act of self-defense. This looked like a plan. And soon, the pieces of that plan began to emerge. Through Jason's journals, Molly's actions, and the inconsistencies in their stories. All right, let's dive into the background drama that set the stage for Jason's tragic end. The moment Jason's body was discovered, the Corbett home transformed from a family residence into a crime scene. Investigators carefully examined the bloodstains, the broken objects, and the layout of the room. The picture that began to form was disturbing. First, there was the overkill factor. Jason had been struck at least 10 times on the head, with such force that parts of his skull had shattered. The baseball bat, which Thomas Martens admitted to using, was covered in Jason's blood and tissue. The paving brick, curiously placed by the bedside table, was also blood-soaked, raising questions. Why was a garden brick inside a bedroom? Then came the forensic evidence. Blood spatter analysis showed that Jason was most likely on the ground when many of the blows were delivered. This suggested he was incapacitated or already dying, yet the attack continued. Self-defense typically ends once the threat is neutralized. Here, the violence carried on well beyond that point. Detectives also noticed inconsistencies in Molly and Thomas's statements. Both claimed Jason had tried to strangle Molly, but her injuries were superficial. She bore no marks on her neck consistent with strangulation, nor did she have defensive wounds that would indicate a struggle for her life. Meanwhile, Jason's children began speaking out. They told authorities that Jason had not been violent toward Molly that night. Instead, they described hearing their stepmother and grandfather yelling, followed by sounds of repeated strikes. Their words added weight to what the evidence already suggested. This was not an act of survival, it was an execution. As the investigation deepened, a disturbing picture of motive began to surface. Molly, who had never adopted Jason's children, was locked in a bitter struggle with him over custody. Jason had even confided to family in Ireland that if anything ever happened to him, Molly and her father should be the first suspects. Those words would soon echo powerfully in court. The trial of Molly and Thomas Martens began in 2017, 2 years after Jason's death. The courtroom in Davidson County, North Carolina, was packed with media, attorneys, and family members flown in from Ireland, all waiting to hear the truth unfold. From the very beginning, the defense painted Jason as a violent, controlling man. They described him as an abuser who allegedly strangled Molly that night, forcing Thomas, her father, to step in and protect her. Their narrative hinged on one word: self-defense. But the prosecution had a very different story. They argued that Jason was the victim of a premeditated attack, orchestrated by his wife and father-in-law. They pointed to the sheer brutality of the killing, at least 10 blows to Jason's head, many delivered while he lay helpless on the floor. The baseball bat was broken from the force of the strikes, and the blood-soaked paving brick told its own story. One of the most chilling moments came when prosecutors reminded the jury that Jason had warned his family in Ireland. "If anything happens to me, look to Molly and her father." His words, now prophetic, lingered heavily in the courtroom. The testimony of Jason's children was also critical. They told the court they hadn't seen their father attack Molly. Instead, they recalled the sound of shouting, then the thud of repeated blows. These children, who had already lost their mother and now their father, became the most haunting witnesses of all. Forensic experts dismantled the self-defense claim. Molly's injuries were minor, inconsistent with a life-threatening struggle. By contrast, Jason's wounds were catastrophic, far exceeding what could be justified as protection. The jury listened to days of testimony, photographs of the crime scene, and the 911 call in which Thomas Martens admitted he had hit him. Slowly, the scales began to tip. The prosecution's message was clear. This wasn't a fight for survival. This was murder in cold blood. After weeks of gripping testimony, the jury delivered its verdict. Both Molly and Thomas Martens were found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence was swift, 20 to 25 years in prison each. Jason's family wept with relief, believing justice had finally been served for the man who had been taken so brutally from them. The guilty verdict in 2017 brought Jason's family some peace, but it didn't last. In 2020, the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned Molly and Thomas Martens' convictions, ruling that the jury hadn't been allowed to hear evidence about Jason's alleged aggression. For Jason's loved ones in Ireland, it felt like justice slipping away. Still, they prepared themselves for a retrial. By 2023, instead of facing another full trial, Molly and Thomas struck a deal. Both pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, a much lesser charge. With time already served, they walked free, after just a few years behind bars. Jason's family called it a betrayal of justice. His sister Tracy said the system had failed, letting his killers go free while Jason's children grew up without their father. Today, Jason's children, Sarah and Jack, are being raised in Ireland by their Aunt Tracy. Far from the chaos of North Carolina, they've built a safer, more stable life while keeping alive the memory of their father. A loving dad, a loyal friend, and a man who rebuilt his life after tragedy. But the case remains deeply divisive. Some argue Molly and Thomas acted in self-defense. Others believe Jason was brutally murdered, and the plea deal was a grave injustice. In the end, the Jason Corbett story is about more than a single crime. It's about love, betrayal, and a justice system that left a family shattered and the world asking, was this really justice, or simply compromise? Thank you for watching. Every victim deserves their story told. If you found this story shocking and heartbreaking, subscribe to Crime Uncovered and help keep their memory alive. What do you think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning everything.